Hello, everybody. I'm Árni Magnús, an independent mediator here at Creditinfo in Iceland. A few things about myself. I started working here way back in 1997 when Creditinfo, or Lánströst as it was known then, had been in operation for only 3 months. So it's only Reynir who has been here for a longer time than I have. For most of the time, I was in the data processing division, but in 2009, we sort of created this independent mediator, and I've been doing that since then. So I'd like to present to you a few things about what I do as an independent mediator. We'll love if this would work. What's happening? Okay, here it comes. Thank you. Okay. So as I said before, this was established in 2009, and a few months prior to that, the Icelandic economy went through a significant turmoil, bank crisis and whatnot. As a consequence, quite a lot of people found themselves in dire straits financially, and the first time registrations, people who were having bad debt registered for the first time, those numbers really spiked. These registrations were, well, quite unwelcomed by the registered party, or some of it's never heard of Creditinfo before. And due to the nature of this banking crisis, the validity of the assumed debt was soon questioned, and this would result in several high-profile court cases. More of that later. However, to cope with the foreseen deluge of new registrations, we sort of decided to channel the more challenging complaints due to pending registrations to an independent mediator. They would therefore not be handled by the service center that usually handles these cases. But if the service center was to recognize there was something a bit strange about the registration the complainant had, I would sort of handle that case and try to see if there was something about it that could be considered misleading or wrong. Now, these complaints, they can come from at least 2 different sources. Some of them come to us via the Data Protection Authority. Anyone who has some complaints about how their personal data is processed can send a complaint to this Data Protection Authority. And if and when that happens, they in turn send this complaint to us for a comment. That is not very common, but when that happens, the independent mediator handles the complaint, and the company's lawyer, which is also our CEO, Hákon, will in many cases add legal insight and expertise when needed. Now, in the end, the TPA rules about the complaint. Was the processing kosher or was something wrong? And if they feel as if the complainant had something to base his case on, that might alter our operating procedures to comply then with this ruling of the TPA. But in most cases, we find out that we were doing things correctly, so they remain the same. But generally, complaints come to us directly from the individual, which has then received a notification about a pending registration on the default debt database. And the service center sends it to the independent mediator if they feel as if the mediator needs to take a better look at the complaint. When that happens, I simply gather information about this. For example, some information from the person who put forward the complaint, or from the creditor, or even the law firm that was collecting the debt. And from this information, I seek to evaluate if the registration might be considered misleading, if not wrong. If there is sort of a reasonable doubt, then the registered party has the benefit of the doubt, so that registration will not be registered. In particular, if there is not a court ruling behind it. And in some other instances, we could have a court ruling which can make a whole range of financial obligations unlawful. If and when that happens, I will have to contact the relevant creditors. Usually, these court rulings has to do with the loans from banks, and ask them to review their registrations in the default debtors database and to deregister those that the court ruling affects. These sort of high-profile rulings are rather uncommon, but they have happened a couple of times or so since the banking crisis. And what happens after that, then the obligations, the financial obligations are recalculated. And in some cases, it's still default debt. And those cases can then be re-registered into the database, while other will stay deregistered. I also check out queries of individuals which have been queried in the database. Somebody looked up the information about them and their status on the default database, default debt database, and these queries must be based on a legitimate interest. For example, when a person is applying for a loan, and such like. As the subscriber makes the query, he also has to choose a reason why he is checking out the status. This applies to individual, not legal entities. And the most common reasons are available from a menu as he is processing. But if none of these reasons apply, he can also simply write down his reasons for checking out the status. If a person receives information about a query about himself and has no recollection of applying for a loan or a credit account, he can contact us, and I will then send an inquiry to the company, the relevant company, asking about the query request and also asking what legitimate interest lay behind this query. Now, we sent out several thousand notifications about queries that have been made in the month earlier. And every month we get a few reactions where people are not quite understanding why they have been queried in the default database. So we're asking about legitimate interests that were behind the query, or further explanation why it was executed. And in some cases, it is revealed that the subscriber did not have a legitimate interest to check the status. Usually, these are it's the same reason that props up every time. The most common cause is that the query is made because the person has a connection to a business, and it was the business, the legal entity, that was applying for a loan. When that happens and the person who has the connection is not directly involved as a guarantor, for example, then it's not kosher. It's not within the legitimate interest to check the person's status on the debtors database. Also, this was perhaps more common a few years back. If a person is applying for a loan, his or her husband or wife is also checked. Now, this is absolutely not allowed. It has also happened that if a subscriber wants to make an offer to a person, that before he makes that offer, he checks the status on the default debtors database beforehand. He will have to do that once the person has accepted the offer. He cannot do it beforehand. and in some cases people's statuses are checked as a part of a hiring process. In some cases that is quite legitimate, in particular if they're hiring a chief financial officer or something like that. But usually businesses are not allowed to check the status as a part of a hiring process. There are of course other reasons why these sort of queries are not based on a legitimate interest, but these are the most common. Well, if and when that happens, I will remind the subscriber of its contractual duties or stipulations which have their origins in relevant laws and regulations. I will also file the complaint in order to have an overview if the same subscriber does not heed the reminder, and I will have more complaints about the same subscribers where he has obviously not taken heed to earlier reminders about how you use the default debt database. This is not common, but should that happen, we are sort of forced to increase subscription fees. And if that trick doesn't do it either, we will have to shut down his access. Maybe first just temporarily, but if it's opened again and same thing happens again, we will have to close access once and for all, and maybe review it a year if we are considering opening it again. But thankfully this is extremely rare. I can only recall 2 instances where I have actually just closed an access and not opened it again. But most subscribers and users, they are fully aware about the rules of conduct. Now, these queries based on legitimate interest are not the only queries that we can make into Creditinfo databases. When it's a question of applying for a loan, you don't need an informed consent before the query is made. This sort of informed consent is, however, required when an individual is queried about his credit score, and also if an individual's list of financial obligations is gathered into a single document. Our subscribers cannot check this information without the person having given them informed consent beforehand. If we get an incident where we know that this consent was not given, then I am much more impatient about closing access. And I will ask for quite a rigid confirmation that the user or the subscribers have been reminded about the rules before opening access again concerning those credit scores and list of financial obligations. Also, the subscribers must be able to prove the existence of an informed consent. It can be audio recording, it can be a signed piece of paper, but they will have to be able to prove it, and it must be readily available if and when I or my colleagues request it. One of the things I also check out if a person is being monitored, and of course monitoring is obviously important for our subscribers if their client's financial situation takes a negative turn. But sometimes they sort of forget to stop monitoring them once they have paid their financial obligations. And this might affect their credit score in some cases. So every now and then we get a complaint about their persons being monitored without any legitimate interest. So in that case, I will send a request to the subscriber concerning the monitoring. And either that results in continued monitoring because there are still legitimate interest in place, or we remove the person from further monitoring of that particular subscriber. Also, as a part of independent mediator's role is to be in contact with institutions and organizations that operate in the field of debt relief and consumer protection and the like, if not for any other reason, but to establish dialogue and make them aware of the services we provide. The clients of these institutions and organizations may, in many instances, have no need for crediting, but every now and then they might. And these relationships are more informal, but also useful. And I think one of the usefulness of us is to battle common misapprehensions about Creditinfo and how it works. And I believe that the more informed the people inside these organizations are about our work, the less likely they are to reinforce these misapprehensions, and in turn then be more likely to encourage people to contact us if they believe it's in the good interest of their clients. And of course, I'm also here to meet people. I and the service center often speak to people who find themselves sort of without good directions or action plans. They have their finances in sort of a state, but have so far not been able to get any directions from anyone. And we try to sort of direct them in the correct place, tell them who to speak to, what information they need to gather, and who to talk to untangle their financial situation, if and when that is possible. And in sort of we're trying to then sort of to give them a plan to follow, in particular when we cannot take actions ourselves on their behalf. And I also meet people who simply come to the office and wish to speak to me, and if need be, help them to devise a plan to the best of my abilities, well, as limited as they might be. And this is, yes, in short, what I do here. So, thank you very much, and please ask me questions if you have any.
Hi, Árni. Thank you for that. I have a question for you. Is there like a deadline for people complaining? So maybe if they wanted to complain about something 18 months ago, 2 years ago, can they do that? Or is it like they have to complain within 2 weeks, a month of whatever it is that happened?
Well, when it comes to registrations in the default debts database, they can complain for as long as the registration is there. And it is there for up to 4 years. But I would say 99% of complaints about registrations happen very soon after registration, or even before the registration. Simply once people get a notification about they will be registered in the database. But if not, they can complain about any registrations, no matter how old it is. But this is not the case with queries into the database. Everyone can access all queries on themselves in the default debtors database 2 years back. And they can therefore complain about these if they want to. Again, it's most common that people complain about recent queries. And our individual web, My Creditinfo, will probably offer people the chance to monitor themselves. So they will get a notification very soon after if they have been queried in a database. And I think this will help us because people will remember it better, of course, if they say a query that was made 2 days ago than if they get a list and they say a query that was perhaps 18 months ago. And it's very difficult also to ask our subscribers to remember. So what were we doing 18 months ago with this one? Even if they have the reason which they choose when they query. query the individual, it's very difficult to remember 18 months back, and we will have to configure that into how our query about the query is answered. However, when it comes to the Data Protection Authority, then people have very limited amount of time to complain to them, and it's sort of limited to 3 months. Otherwise, they will not take the case unless it's how do you say of a greater magnitude. That's their discretion to choose what is what. Would that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I know that's very detailed. I have another question for you, which I've been sent in the chat box from Sana in Malta.
Right.
If you receive a letter from a lawyer asking you to remove a claim shown against one of their clients, how would you go about that?
Well, we'll have to take a look at what sort of a registration this is. If it's backed up by a ruling of, for example, a court, then I cannot remove that registration unless the lawyer who is acting on the behalf of his client is appealing it. Then he will have to confirm that that appeal is indeed has been sent to the courts, and then I can deregister it, and I will then re-register it if after the appeal the debt has been confirmed by the higher court. But it, of course, will remain deregistered if the debt has been ruled to be unlawful. However, if the lawyer or even the individual being registered is complaining about a registration that does not have a ruling behind it from a district magistrate or a court, we will have to deregister that simply based on the fact that it doesn't have this ruling behind it. That might be sort of a temporary solution for the person who was about to be registered, since whoever owns the claim, the claimant, continues his collection of the debt, and that collection might end up being a ruling, which in turn comes back to the default database, and which in turn will not be deregistered just because people are saying that it is unlawful or yes. Then they would have to apply again to a higher court for that to happen. Did I make myself clear at all here?
Yeah, no, I think that's clear. So basically saying if you just because a lawyer tells you you've got to remove it, you don't have to. It's not the law. It depends on the actual status of the complaint and the query.
Yeah, well, it depends on what sort of a registration we're speaking of, yes.
Okay. I have a question from Sasha in Czech Republic.
Right.
With My Creditinfo, okay, do you plan to build in some interface for consumers where they can file a dispute which will go directly to a complaint system? Or do you actually prefer actually receiving an email from a consumer describing his issue?
The way it is operating now, that's the latter one. They use the web to sort of send us a message, and the message comes to us by an email. And then simply it's about the nature of the complaint, what will happen to it next. I don't know if there is any plans to change that. Not aware of that.
Okay.
Right.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, I think that's it for today, Árni. But if you just could you just tap forward to the next slide, because your contact details
Right.
are on there.
Right.
So if anybody has any queries, would it be okay if they emailed you directly?
Very welcome. Anytime.
Thank you ever so much. I really appreciate your time today, Ari. So, and very interesting to find out about what you do. So,
thanks for having me.
okay. Thanks a lot, everybody. See you next time. Bye for now.